Hello, all my wonderful darlings of the internets. This is the Red Dawn podcast, brought to you by an angry platypus. Are you angry?
Doing okay. Doing okay.
So we're going to be talking about bug out vehicles, and Duke is duking out on us for whatever reason again. I guess he has school or some shit. And Angry is like the car guy anyway, and I've been thinking a lot about vehicles lately because I'm trying to pimp out my van. So what do you think about bug out vehicles? What do you have?
I don't really have a decent bug out vehicle at all, but I have a 2010 Audi two-door. Like,
Yeah.
I have a sports car that's a German
Well, at
modern
least you
electronic
could like
nightmare.
load that thing up with shit and drive out someplace, pretty
Yeah.
fast. Like,
Well, so that's the first thing to mention about bug out vehicles is that for most people, it's going to be what you have.
yeah,
Like, it's what you have that's readily available. Now, granted, some people might be in a situation where they can have a secondary vehicle to be a dedicated bug out vehicle, in which case, fantastic. Like, good for you. If you're trying to get a bug out vehicle during this time,
you're
they can be.
fucked.
It can be done. It can be done, but it's a lot harder than it was.
I
You know,
I got
two,
so
3 years ago.
lucky.
Yeah,
I scored that van for $2,000, and if I hadn't bought that, then I don't think I would have found anything for less than 6 grand. It's just that's the way the market is around here, and I think that's cheap for most of the country. Like if you go to California and New York, those numbers are chump change, I'm sure.
yeah. I mean, it depends on your location. It depends on what's available too, right? And the problem
Yeah.
is that, like, if you live in a place like the Northeast or even like the North or something where you have a lot of rot, like you have people selling literally rotted out vehicles for 5 times what they're worth. Um, Now, one of the few good signs if you're looking for a bug out vehicle, and I guess
We lose you. Angry? Well, I guess we lost Angry. He'll be back in a minute. Well, he was in the middle of a thought there, so that's fun. Welcome to the Red Dawn podcast, where it's just me talking all by myself now. So, vehicle wise, my thoughts are as a secondary vehicle, get something cheap. So, either you don't have a other vehicle to drive yet, and you're buying a cheap van probably to have as a bug out vehicle. That's what I'm doing. And I went with a minivan because you can get them dirt cheap. They have enough room to hold some shit inside of them. They can go most places. If you get a 4-wheel drive one, they're really cool. And the 2-wheel drive one, even you can go a lot of fucking places, man. And if you get like a Honda or a Toyota, you just can't kill them. They last for fucking ever. And for anything that I would be doing bug out wise, I'm not seeing this as like something where like we're going to be driving through the Rocky Mountains with this thing. We're probably going to be on roads, maybe dirt roads at worst. Like I would really like to have, the shit in the van in case we got stuck to get us unstuck. But like I don't see the need to have 4-wheel drive even. But that's just in my opinion. If you can get 4-wheel drive and a winch and shit like that, then that's just more the better. I hope Angry gets back soon because I'm gonna run out of shit to talk about. Let's see what you guys are saying. See, yeah, that's what I'm saying about the minivan is basically that it looks like something anyone would fucking drive. So it's like it blends in a lot. Hi, Angry. How are you?
Hi, good fucking Christ. Sorry about that. I knew that was gonna happen. Um,
I just talked about minivans while you were gone because I didn't know what else to
okay.
do.
Yeah, so to kind of where I was getting at was like if you're looking for deals right now, there are deals to be had simply because of the current state of affairs we're in. You're starting to see stuff that doesn't get great gas mileage, like your larger trucks that have V8s in them. I'm talking like your F-350s, your big Silverados, stuff like that. Some of your larger diesel trucks, just because people can't afford to gas fuel them up anymore. And those
Yep.
are solid vehicles. I mean, it just sucks that, they're thirsty and it's something that, is going to be costly to fill up. But if you're just kind of rainy day, like let's say you have a couple, things of gas sitting around and you can fill it up and just kind of keep it, go out there, start it up every now and then type stuff, throw a gallon or two in it, but I wouldn't use it as your daily commuter. Those are great. Like those are starting to come down. You can get those for a good price.
Well, something like that I saw is used ambulances are like 5 to 6 grand, and I'm not talking about like 20 years old. I'm talking about like 2 to 5 years old with less than 100,000 miles on them for like 6 grand.
Yeah, that's
And
another one you
like
can
they
do.
do eat gas, from what I understand, but they're diesels, and that's an option, at least.
That's an option. Um, Vans in general, at least for the most part. Now, granted, they've come up in the past couple years because everyone's doing the whole vanning craze and shit.
Yeah.
Um,
That's
but
why
for
I
a
like
long
the
time,
minivan. No one buys those for the van shit yet.
yeah, yeah. Um, but any of those types of things, like you're going to be able to get, you know, slightly. I mean, even now, like you can get an old contractor van for pretty decent prices. Now, granted, it's going to be beat to shit. The inside's going to be like you're not going to get something that's nice looking, but you're going to get something that you can throw a bunch of bags of shit into and haul off. Now, it's going to be here's kind of where I go into my different, styles and what you have available to you and yada yada yada. Um, everyone's situation's got to be different. If I have a family of, you know, 5 kids or something, or like 5 people or something, like contractor van's probably not going to be the move, just because even though it has a lot of room, doesn't have a lot of room for people. Um, in that case, maybe like a minivan or a wagon's going to be a better bet. You probably already have one of those, but or a large SUV like a Suburban or something like that. Um,
The minivan is the thing that everybody has, like tucked away. That's like grandma was driving that or whatever, and like some of those, they may not have a lot of life left in them, but like if you replace a handful of parts on a Toyota or a Honda, it'll go a long time more. Like,
that's the thing is find like the Toyota and Honda ones for sale. Not as
yeah,
many people are selling those. Like your Dodge Caravans, your Chevy Venturas, your Ford Windstars, like those tend to go up a lot more often. Um, and they're not bad, but they don't tend to have the same lifelong life of your Hondas, your Toyotas, stuff like that. Um, it depends what you're going to do with your bug out vehicle too, right? Because like
yeah.
if you're planning on going up into the mountains, in like a snow, like probably a minivan is not going to be the best bet. If you're just like, oh, I'm just going to go down the road and kind of like hide off in the woods, you can probably get away with a minivan. Um,
Well, see, that's what I was saying before you got here. Was basically I don't figure on going anywhere where there's not a road, maybe a dirt road, and like maybe up in the mountains if the weather is nice. But I'm not going to go up there in the middle of the snow or some shit. I wouldn't do that anyway.
yeah,
Like that doesn't make
yeah.
sense to me.
So it's again, it's going to be your situation, your bug out location, stuff like that's going to determine your bug out vehicle. Um, if I'm talking about an extra one, another thing to think about is commonality of parts. Now, one of the things that you know, I know we've heard it in other people's chats and stuff, oh, go like Toyotas and Hondas because they're reliable. You're right. They are reliable. Parts are relatively easy to get, but simplicity is key. So like one of the things I'm looking at right now for both a can be used as a bug out vehicle and a just a fun toy for myself if I want to is, you know, big domestic car. I shouldn't even say big domestic cars, like domestic vehicles, and your common stuff. So like as much as fuel consumption sucks, your stuff with Chevy V8s in it, your LT series, your 350s, your 302s.
Is that just stuff just easy to work on and easy to get parts for in America?
It's easy to work on. It's easy to get. Like if you have an LT or an LS in any vehicle you have, I mean, let's say you have a truck with an LS motor in it, right, which is just a Chevy V8 for the most part. You can go to any junkyard or parts place in America, and there's going to be a million parts for an LS or a 350 in there.
I kind of figured that Honda minivan was going to be like that too. I bet there's a lot of those just sitting in junkyards, but maybe I'm wrong.
It is. I mean, there probably is, but not nearly as much as like. Because again,
I
like
guess you're talking about
just,
like every Chevy ever made or some shit, right?
Well, that's the thing. You have to find commonality. So, like for instance, when it comes to Chevys, right? And I know there's probably people in the chat that are like, that Chevy guy. Okay, Fords, whatever. Like they used a lot of the same motors or a variation of that motor in a lot of different platforms. So you can go to, you know, if you have again, I'm using a Chevy truck as an example. Chevy truck with a 350, that thing breaks down or you need a part, you can go to a junkyard. I mean, if you can't find it on the road, you can go to a junkyard and you can go to a Suburban or a million other trucks or a van even or a Corvette and you can pull off parts and it's like, okay, it's boom. There might be some variances between some certain parts, but for the most part, a lot of those parts cross over.
Yeah.
And again, like another thing to think about is when it comes to bugging out, like I'm also looking at possibly getting an older bike. And granted, I know a bike's not going to be the answer for everyone. For some people, it will be. But I want a bike with like
carry the amount of shit I want to haul.
Well, I'm looking at it as more something I can throw into like a truck or something like that, or mount to a vehicle, and more for like a get around type thing once I'm to my bug out spot. Simply because
it would be really cool to have a light enough bike to just like tie that bitch onto the front of the car.
Yeah.
Like what was that in Independence Day when they're fucking running from the aliens and they have that mobile home? They have like a motorcycle just like bungee corded to the front of that fucker.
I mean, you can get like a small little 125 or something, which I mean, granted, it's not going to carry a bunch of shit. It's not going to be fast.
Yeah.
But and the reason I'm saying like a bike or something, like I'm looking at a bike, that's for me. But I'm also going to probably have shit packed away at different areas, so I don't really need to carry a bunch of shit when I'm going from point A to point B.
Would you
But
get
the reason why is because simplicity, because when you have something that's carbureted, now granted not everyone knows how to work on a carburetor, but they're mechanical. You don't have to worry about electronics at all. You don't have to worry about charging up a scan tool or hooking up a laptop or hooking up like you don't have to worry about that crap. Now if you have that stuff, like my current vehicle, I have to have stuff to deal with electronics, so I have a scan tool. It's not going to do everything I need on that car's computer, but it's going to do most of the shit. Like I can hunt down problems for the most part with that scan tool, but it's not going to be a save all on stuff. And like, God forbid, I have to replace a computer, like something electronic on there I need an actual like Audi scan tool to reset some stuff. So it sucks.
So I have a question. Remember that Royal Enfield motorcycle we were talking about a couple weeks ago?
Vaguely.
Would you get something like that as a bug out bike? Because like that thing's pretty old school.
Yeah, something like that would be fine. The problem, though, again, kind of circling back to the beginning of the chat with bikes right now, this is the time that everyone wants a bike. So trying to find a bike is very hard. I should say trying to find a bike for a decent price is very hard because we're going into bike season. So, boom.
Well, I'm not buying one anytime soon. I went with a fucking mountain bike and a scooter instead of a motorcycle.
seeing here's some other people put in here, dirt bikes, like that's a great because I mean all
That would be
reality
great.
in the end of the world, like no one really gives a shit if you have headlights and turn signals on your bike.
Yep. You could ride the dirt bike anywhere in the end of the world.
Yeah.
And like honestly, that's more the kind of bike I would want in the end of the world. One that could like go off road and shit, or at least is made to.
Yeah. I mean, granted, I mean, you can also get an enduro or something like that, which would be fine, or a scrambler. You can do quite a bit of off-roading with those, but not
If you
serious
got a
stuff.
light enough dirt bike though, like I don't know how much power you're giving up when you get a light one though. I guess probably a
Well, it's
lot.
not. It's not the weight. It's the CC of the motor. So, like, I mean, they
That's what
have
I'm
little,
saying. Like the lighter you go, the smaller the motor it has. I'm guessing, right?
for the most part. I mean, for something general purpose, like again, like if you're just strapping it to a vehicle as a get around, like
That's what
you'd
I'm
be
talking about.
fine. Yeah, you'd be fine with like something 200, 250 cc for the most part. Now, granted, again, it's not going to be fast. It's not going to be great, but that's light enough that you could easily haul it. Now, granted, if you have a truck or something, who the fuck cares? You can throw whatever size dirt bike you want in the back, and you're good.
So I'm actually thinking about like getting a cargo trailer. And you remember that little four-wheeled fucking electric bike thing I showed you?
Yes.
If I can charge that off of a solar rig, I want to save up and get one of those. But you could have a dirt bike in there just as easy. But I want something like that that like either is gas powered or could be recharged off of solar somehow. That is like a secondary vehicle.
Yeah, and you could definitely do that with a cargo trailer. Um, just throw some bikes in there, or throw something like that in there, or a quad or whatever. 100%. And you could hook up a cargo trailer to just about any large vehicle, even a minivan. I mean, I've seen tow rigs on minivans. I don't recommend them necessarily, but you can do it.
I I was gonna get a tow rig for the minivan and just pack the trailer real light and buy a really light trailer.
It can be done.
Yeah. Well, you remember like Always Sunny when they take the road trip and they have like the living room and the trailer back there where they had like wicker furniture duct taped into the fucking trailer.
Yeah,
I want to do like that and be able to store a small vehicle in it. So it's like a, living room in and out of the rain or whatever, but it's also a place to store like a bike.
yeah. Like me, yeah. I'm like I don't have storage here at my apartment really for a bike, so I'd be keeping up at my parents' house because they have a garage up there. But
Yeah.
and that's if I decide to go with the bike first. Like I really want to get an actual like car or truck first, but we'll see. We'll see what because again, like just the current state of things, it just sucks to do any of that stuff. So
Do you think it would be too much to have a trailer after the trailer that's like a gas pod with a war boy with a flamethrower on it?
yes, because if you've never driven with a trailer, it's a whole different experience.
Yeah, you'd probably have to have like some rear wheel steering or some shit on that gas boy.
I mean, it's not something that you could even hook up. It's just, I mean, understanding how to drive with a trailer is it takes practice. So that's something again I would do is if you buy a trailer, let's say you want a trailer for your vehicle to haul extra stuff, even if it's not another vehicle, even if it's just extra supplies, hook it up and practice with it. Don't just be like, oh, I got my trailer for my stuff. All right,
Yeah,
I'll wait till the end of the like
I
hook it.
figure I would like put it on and drive around a little bit and get a feel for it, and then like in the end of the world or whatever, I'm just never gonna back up. I'm just only ever gonna go forward. That's gonna be my secret.
Well. best of luck. Um, but yeah, so it's tough. I'm trying to think of like what other topics to hit on bug out vehicle. I guess we could hit, you
Well, I
know,
wanted to talk about arms. Like, would you have heavier guns if you're in a vehicle? Because I would for sure. Like,
I'm,
shotguns become a lot more viable thing to have with you.
I mean, obviously I'm gonna be probably armed in the vehicle, but I'm not. My whole purpose of a bug out vehicle, I'm not trying to Mad Max it, right? Like,
Yeah.
unless it gets to that point down the road, then that's a whole different situation. But the whole purpose of me having a bug out vehicle is to have a reliable vehicle to get me from point A to point B. I'm not, sitting there trying to go to war with it and trying to make it a technical, like that's not what it's for. And so if I have to defend myself with it, I'm gonna have weapons on board to defend myself.
I
I'm not.
really want to build a 2-inch breech loading swivel gun and mount it in some way on the minivan just for the LOLs of it.
I mean, it's cool and stuff. It's just I don't want weapons hanging off my vehicle and kind of like calling to me as like, "Hey, look at
Yeah.
me!" Like,
I figure it would be like there'd be a mount for it, and then like you'd have it in like the trunk, and you'd have to pull out your cannon and mount it up.
mm.
Yeah.
I like when I think of weapons on a vehicle, I think of more like defensive stuff. So, um, like push bars. If you have to move debris or vehicles out of the way or something.
I'm
Um,
seriously thinking about putting some sort of like push bar and winch type of thing on the front of my thing. It
oh,
already has
oh,
an exposed bumper.
a winch is another thing. It's another great investment. Again, depending on the vehicle. Like if your bug out vehicle is a 1992 Chevy Cavalier or something, you're not going to be hooking up a bull bar and winch to it. There's just really no point. Um,
My thing is, I could see a spot where that minivan would get stuck, where a winch would pull me out of, and I think that's worth having.
yeah, yeah. Another thing, I mean, if you want to go defensive wise, um, you can. It has been done. It's not something that I mess around with, but you can hook up stuff to do like smoke screens and such like that, which you can argue the effectiveness of it. I would think of more something like tire poppers or something like that, but even those you could really just have like a cup holder full, like a big like I don't know, super gulp or whatever full of like tire poppers. Just chuck them out the window if something's following you.
Yeah,
Um,
it would be nice to make up some of those. If you make them out of tube, they work better, apparently. You know what I'm
but
talking about? You take like
yeah,
two bent pieces of sharpened tube and weld them together.
yeah, because it helps the air
Yeah.
actually sucks the air out more. Um, but really, like that would be the extent when it comes to uh, offense. Maybe lights, like a couple light bars or something like that. If you're trying to blind something.
I think I
Um,
am gonna do a light bar because I'm gonna do some sort of roof rack thing for storage
yeah,
of like at least fuel cans and shit like that. And once you have that already, you might as well add some lights up there.
yeah.
I'm gonna
Um,
have like the weirdest looking minivan ever. It's gonna be great.
but yeah, but outside that, like I'm not hooking like spikes to my car or mounted weapon. Like, nah, I'm not doing any of that stuff. Like,
I'm gonna have
oh,
200 watts of solar on the roof. I think that's worth having.
well, yeah, but you're also using your vehicle as like a bug out like living vehicle.
Yeah.
And I guess that brings into another aspect of it, right? Like when we say bug out vehicles, are we planning on going out and living in our vehicle, or are we just using our vehicle to bug out and get to another location, or both?
My thought is both, and that's why I'm setting this up to like live as a nomad out in the desert because honestly, that makes you the hardest to fucking kill. And if shit gets bad enough, that's what I'm gonna go do. Like, it's not that hard to like have a big jug of water and a big jug of gas and go out in the desert until they fucking run out and then come back in. Like, it's a hell of a lot better than fucking just sitting and waiting to die or whatever. I don't know. But like the desert has its own fucking shit you don't want to deal with. So I might actually just do that, but somewhere where there's water.
Yeah, in those types of cases, like if that's the case of what we're doing, then I want something that, and you can do a ton of shit, but like I want something preferably four-wheel drive,
18.
um, a larger vehicle, just because
What do
especially
you
if
think
me,
about like a Unimog?
I mean, Unimogs are cool, but you're not gonna get them for cheap.
No, they're not cheap. But like
And I mean,
if you have all the money in the world, like who knows who's listening to this, but like if you're a billionaire, go buy a Unimog. Those are cool.
yeah, they're awesome vehicles and stuff, but again, it's like, you know, I you're gonna have to take time to build it up because a base Unimog is not comfortable.
No,
Um,
they're not.
and don't get me wrong, they're very capable vehicles, but then I look at the flip side of that too, because like I have a buddy of mine, he just bought two 5-ton trucks, Army surplus 5-ton trucks.
A
And
deuce and a half would be really fucking cool. You get one of those,
yeah,
like
well he bought them because like his father owns like a landscaping business, so like one of them they're using for just like towing around like a big ass uh piece of farm equipment and stuff. And the other
yeah.
one like is just he's like, well, I got a good deal on them both,
Are
so
they
he's like the other one
like fuel or are they just like a standard gas truck?
flex. So like
That's dope. Like
some
honestly, you should have bought more of those.
like it's a cool vehicle, don't get me wrong, but then I look on the flip side of like, okay, if I'm bugging out, like a military truck or an Unimog or something, like they stand out.
Yeah, well, that's
Um,
half the thing I like about my minivan is like it might stand out after I get done bolting shit to it, but not much compared to a
yeah,
Unimog. A fucking Unimog is gonna make you a target.
exactly. And so like I like what like Night Prowler put in here, like an old Chevy Blazer, like something like that. They're a big truck, but they can get out of their own. Because that's the other thing too with like Deuce and a Halves and Unimogs. Unless you tune them up, they're slow as fuck.
I almost
Like
bought a Bronco. It was like a '97 Bronco.
see like something like that, yeah.
It was
Like
6 grand, and like I was looking at it or this van, and I almost went Bronco, but it was 3 times the money, and it had more miles than the van did, and I'm like,
yeah, but like stuff like that, like yes, it can do 90% of what you're gonna have to need it to do when it comes to like off-roading stuff. Parts are readily accessible because that's the other thing too with like those Unimogs and Deuce and a Half and stuff. Yeah, like you can get military parts, but like you're not running down to your local auto store and buying replacement parts for that stuff. I mean, you can get some stuff, but like for the most part, you're probably not going to replace, and you're not going to go to the average junkyard and get replacement parts. Now, granted, they're pretty bulletproof to begin with. Not actually bulletproof, but you know what I mean.
yeah,
Um, but it's that weird like, eh, where like an old Chevy Blazer or a Bronco, like fucking parts everywhere.
yeah.
And they blend in a little bit better. Do they blend in completely? No, but they blend in better.
That's where I think like even like a Jeep Wrangler, I think would blend in better than like a Unimog. But I don't know if I'd want to be riding around in that thing because like in the here and now, if you have like a Jeep Rubicon or something sitting on the street, you're probably gonna get stolen. What
So
does it tell you about the end of the world? You know?
so the thing with like a Wrangler, like don't get me wrong, super great vehicles. But again, if we're using
Tiny.
it as I'm going to go out and live in the woods, I wouldn't really want to live in a Wrangler either. It's kind of small. Although
That's
the
my
new ones
opinion.
aren't.
They're
Like,
fucking tiny as shit, in my opinion.
I mean, the new ones aren't. The new ones are fucking as big as like an old Cherokee.
I,
So I'd probably go more like a Cherokee or something. But
what was the A-Team van?
that was a GMC.
Because something like that with four-wheel drive would be ideal.
Yeah, and they do have four-wheel drive. Ford made a version. Chevy, I think, made a version. They do have four-wheel drive vans.
Yeah, the van I was looking at when I bought the one I did was 10,000, but it was a four-wheel drive Toyota with not very many miles on it, and it had just fucking sold before I fucking got there. That's how I ended up with the $2,000 shipmobile.
Yeah. I mean, there is stuff. I mean, and be creative too, right? I mean, it's one of those things. And again, it comes down to your own situation. Like if you're living in New York City, like a bug out vehicle is going to be completely different than if you're living in the suburbs of, you know, Philadelphia or something. Like your bug out vehicle options are going to be extremely different. That's true too. Like learn some basic mechanic skills, like a slab of leather and some razor knife will just make about a gasket for anything, at least temporarily. If you're going to have a bug out vehicle, I would say I think you can still get those Haynes manuals for stuff. Pick up a Haynes manual with it so you have at least an understanding or something you can reach. Because who knows in the end of the world if we're going to have internet. Like in this day and age, like, yeah, it's great. You can whip out your smartphone, look up how to fix just about anything on your car. It's great. But if that goes away, how are you going to know to change all your crap?
So
right?
I kind of figure I taught myself how to work on guns by just going and like fucking with them and taking them apart. I figure I'm just gonna go do that with this minivan.
Yeah, no.
And
Guns are a lot less complex
I
creatures
don't know.
than.
I'm pretty handy at taking shit apart, putting it back together. Angry.
Yeah, but are you going to know that a certain bearing is a press bearing or something like that? Or are you
I don't
going to
know.
know what specific
Yeah,
tools you need for something?
probably not.
Yeah, I'm
You're
just saying,
saying I
like,
should actually like go get a mechanic?
well, no, you go to your local auto parts store, you hop online, look up your year, make, model of your vehicle, and order a Haynes manual. That Haynes manual will tell you how to fix anything on that vehicle. It'll tell you what you need, how to do it. Like, they are invaluable. For every vehicle I've ever owned, I've had a Haynes manual for it. And it has saved my ass more than once when you're sitting there like knocking on something. You're like, why the fuck won't this thing come apart? And you're like, oh, because for this specific vehicle, for this specific make, instead of doing what they've always done, they did something goofy because engineers.
So it's like when Smith and Wesson makes an AR-15 and they decide that instead of making their pins go the way that every other manufacturer makes their pins go, they make their pins go the opposite way. But for every vehicle known to man.
Yeah, like I'm just saying, it's going to save you immensely. And I like what G.I. Joe put in here. Like, if you're looking for a bug out vehicle, the simpler the better. So that typically means older vehicles, not always, because they did some really goofy shit in the 80s.
What do you think of the one I got? It's 2004 Honda.
I mean, there's definitely simpler vehicles out there because you still have electronic
I
fuel
don't know that
injection.
much about like the electronics and shit inside it. I bought it because it was cheap.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. A 2004 Honda is going to be a lot simpler to work on than a 2014 Honda, or a 2022 Honda. But it's still not going to be as simple to work on as, you know, a 1994 Honda. As vehicles get newer,
What
they get
my
more complex.
issue is as they get older, they're going to have more and more issues, aren't they?
Not necessarily. It depends if they were maintained. Like just because they're older doesn't mean that they're going to have more issues. It comes down to was the proper maintenance done on them? How many miles are on them? And even then, like people put a lot of spec in the miles. Like if I got an old diesel truck with 250,000 miles on it, like I wouldn't even question it because it's possible as long as that vehicle was maintained, that vehicle's fucking rock solid. Just because it's older doesn't mean it has more stuff wrong with it. It all comes down to how it was maintained. Was the proper, because every vehicle has hiccups or known issues. Were those issues addressed? Were the proper repairs made early on type stuff? And then, how's it been kept so far? And then just understanding like, okay, this vehicle has XYZ miles on it. What parts are probably coming up that are going to be going? Is it going to need brakes soon? Is it going to need shocks soon? Um, if so, and sometimes like that stuff's very easy to do on older vehicles and cheaper to do on older vehicles compared to newer vehicles. So,
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking about what I'm gonna buy next because this cheap ass minivan is, a means to an end, probably. Like I'm gonna have this for a couple of years or whatever, but
yeah.
I want to get something else eventually. And like if I could get something from like the 70s that was like a four-wheel drive van, I think that'd
Oh
be
yeah,
cool.
see that's like simple stupid. And granted, I mean, again, you're gonna have to watch for like how it was maintained and stuff because you don't want something that's all rotted out. You don't want something that's like,
Well,
oh, it sat in
am
my
I
garage
better
for
off
30
just
years.
buying a junker and having it rebuilt at that point?
No, not necessarily, because it depends how much work needs to be done.
Okay.
Because again, like to the point of like, oh, this has been sitting in my barn for 30 years. Well, that thing's probably, I mean, it could be fine, but more than likely it's fucked because it's had animals crawling in it and chewing wires and stuff and chewing lines that you're going to have to replace and hoses. And it's probably rotted out. And like body rot is not something like it can be replaced and fixed, but it's very expensive and a pain in the ass to do. It's not something most people are going to do. You have to bring it to a body shop to do, and then
Yeah.
it just becomes extremely expensive. It's still too if you find a '70s van that was has some more
I'm,
miles on it, but it was
I'm
always
seriously thinking about getting an ambulance.
well. That's an option. I mean, depending on how. I mean, even the newer ones and stuff are probably fine. And granted, the one nice thing when it comes to government vehicles, let me specify this. Depending on the government vehicle, sometimes they're because it's just one of those things where it's like, oh, something went out, like it went off to the mechanic, like it wasn't slept on for the most part. Now, when it comes to like police vehicles, that's a different situation. Those could be very hit or miss. Um, but like
Tuesday
your
night,
ambulances,
9 o'clock.
fire vehicles, stuff like that, you're probably a little bit better off on.
Yeah.
Even stuff before 1989 has computers in it. Like they were throwing computers and stuff technically in the 70s, but really it started to hit early to mid 80s.
So
Um,
if we're talking about a vehicle that we want to be able to live out of, because who knows, like if this is really, you're leaving your house, you don't know where you're going to end up. So have a vehicle that's built to live out of is my theory, and that tends to be vans because of the room inside, right? Like, what would you get other than but maybe a camper truck?
so a couple options, like, so yeah, your vans are going to give you probably the most bang for your buck room, but you can get a lot of room out of even like a Suburban or something like that, like an old Suburban.
If
Take
you
those
could get
bags.
a box truck, like a moving truck, like a U-Haul, cheap enough, one of those would be cool to build a thing inside of.
They're cool for like, again, it depends on what you're trying to do. The problem with a box truck is getting moving around with a box truck. Like it's
Yeah,
a lot
that'd be
heftier than a
better.
van, and they stand out more. Um, your normal like larger SUVs, especially if you don't need all those rows of seats, take a row of seats out. Boom. Or take
What
two
about
rows of
like a
seats out.
school bus, a short one?
Again, like they're fine, but they're gonna stand out. Like
Well,
if you're
again, if this is something you're going to drive off out into the back country or whatever and go from place to place, like,
yeah.
does it
And
matter?
and that's the thing, like when it comes to the whole like vanning lifestyle, and a lot of that vanning lifestyle stuff, you can directly equate that to bugging out because those people are living out of their
That's
vehicles.
exactly my point. I'm
So
considering these one and the same.
yeah, so for that stuff like box trucks, or short school buses, how long school buses, um, that type of stuff is fine. I'm trying to think of like multi-purpose type stuff. Again, like I'm trying to
I've been
think of
watching a
like,
lot of the tiny homes on wheels people and a lot of the van life people and the bug out vehicle people. Like all of this shit I think is super useful. I've gotten so many useful things from the van life people in particular, or like there's a channel that's Cheap RV Living that's all about like fucking getting homeless people into cheap vans. Basically, it's like G Web's
Hmm.
idea or some
Something
shit that times all the homeless people.
I like a bug out vehicle that a lot of people sleep on. And it's tough because you don't find a lot of them out there anymore because they're not as popular, especially newer vehicles, but wagons. So now, granted,
Yeah,
you're not going to have the off-road capacity of like an SUV, a truck, a 4x4 van, but
but
you're
you could
going
have
to
a
have
bed
that.
in the back of that thing.
Well, you're going to have that low profile,
Yeah,
definitely. Um, now, granted, a lot of people nowadays are going into crossovers. Like, there's a billion crossovers out there. Um, you can live out of a crossover again if you had to. And again, it comes down to how many people you have. If it's just you, living out of a vehicle is a lot more manageable than if it's you and kids, in which case you're going to have to probably upgrade to a bus or something like that. You might be able to do a van, but it'd be tough.
this is where like I think being a single person or maybe a couple has its advantages over being a family, and that's just like that's who I'm talking to, I guess, because that's where I'm at in life. Like if you're here to get advice about what to do with your family, I guess that's a different channel maybe, but we could speak to that. What kind of vehicle would you get for a big family? Like
I
I
mean,
don't
if
even
you're a
know
big,
how.
again, if you're a big family and you're having to bug out, like if I'm a big family, I'm not living out of my vehicle.
No,
It's
you'd
just
have to
not
have a
gonna.
big tent or something, right?
I'd have to have a bus or something like that. Um, so in those types of situations, or box truck with like bunk beds or something, like I have to have a big vehicle. In the case of a family, again, depends on the size of the family. Like most people are going to use what they have, which is probably in this day and age some sort of crossover. Maybe you have like a big SUV or something like that. If you're going out to buy a bug out vehicle for that type of situation, honestly, myself, like if it was me, a wife, and like two kids, right? And
Yeah.
I'm thinking about like, oh shit, I got to go bug out. I'm looking at, and I have to go buy a bug out vehicle. I'm looking at your large older Suburbans, your larger uh, older possibly Broncos, um, your your older like big square body like long bed, full cab trucks, whether it be Ford, Dodge, Chevy, whatever. Um, Maybe looking at a wagon if I'm like staying more on city roads and don't have to go off road at all. And I'm talking like an old like Buick Roadmaster or the something along those lines, something that even the tourist wagons, like granted I understand like not as much, but they made a billion Tauruses, so like you can find Taurus parts everywhere and they're cheap and they're easy to fix. Trying to think what else really I would look at. Something like that, just something that's old, simple, stupid. Because even I've been seeing in the chat like people are like, oh, don't do anything with computers. Well, yes, I agree. Like if you can avoid computers, avoid them just because it's one extra thing to go wrong, and if a computer goes down, your whole system's kind of kaput. But if it's an older vehicle, again, there's variations. But like your older, like mid to early 90s, like stuff, a lot of those computers are pretty cheap still, and they're not too complex. And a lot of those vehicles, like you can rip them out of one and kind of throw them in the other. And for the most part, not always, but for the most part, you'll be fine. Um, you don't have to do as much programming. Some of your 80s stuff can get kind of wonky because some of those computers, like they had weird shit in the 80s because they're trying to figure out cars, so they have like electronic carburetors and shit. It's weird and dumb, and vacuum lines controlling a bunch of. It's goofy. But just understand your vehicle, and again, that's where those manuals come into play. So like before you go buy a vehicle, don't just be like, oh, old truck, I want this. Like take a look at it, go home, research it, figure out like, okay, here's the stuff I need to know about this vehicle. Is there any wonky stuff I need to know about? Is there any known issues I need to know about before you go and you make a decision?
What do you think about overlanding? Have you ever looked into that at all?
I mean, I've never looked. I mean, I've watched videos and stuff on it. I have a buddy that actually just built
It's
a
I've
Ram
been
TRX
watching
overland rig.
stuff about that mainly because like much like the van life people, this is like directly applicable to a
It's
bug out.
yeah, it's like overlanding with tents.
Yeah,
It's like van life with a tent, um, and
and
like
like somewhere
shovels and shit.
between the two is bugging out.
Yeah. One thing I did want to mention because I know we're very focused on like vehicles and stuff, right? And like cars and
Yeah.
trucks and bikes and stuff, right? Um, but I want to think of like alternate methods, right? So like for some people, especially if you live in a heavy populated city, maybe a bicycle is your bug out. Like as much as that sucks, donkey nuts, maybe that's your bug
Well,
out vehicle.
that I
So
have that shit for the van. At least that's my plan is to run that thing someplace until I'm out of gas off in the woods somewhere, and then
yeah.
have that as like a cabin basically, and use the mountain bike and scooter to go get shit.
Well, so that's where I was going with that stuff. Is like you can get trailers for bikes and stuff like that. Um, maybe, and again, depending on where you are, maybe you have a plan to go out on a boat or something like that. As much as I'm not a boat person, I mean, I love being out on boats,
I
but I never want to own a boat because they're expensive.
I would love
Um,
to have a bug out sailboat.
but that's what I'm thinking. So like maybe you have a lake someplace, right? Or there's a lake someplace. Like a bugging out to a boat on a lake is an option, and that kind of goes into like bug out locations, which I know we covered. But like that is an option of hey, maybe I just need a vehicle to get me to my boat, and that boat, like again, depending on where you live, like Duke up in the lakes and stuff, like a bug out, getting him to a bug out boat, and then living his family on
Yeah.
a boat, hopping between the islands or something. That might be a viable solution to him. In which case, that boat, you throw a bike or two on there. It's like okay, cool. Now I can hop around to islands if I need to get off and scout or scavenge or something. I can. Then I go back to my vehicle, which is a boat that I live on.
The way I'm looking at the world heading is not that like it goes full blown apocalypse, whatever, but like things get economically bad and that makes crime go up and shit and the cities become places you don't want to be, and maybe you want a fucking vehicle to go out into the wild somewhere and just chill for a month or two, like pack it full of food and fucking have a freezer on board full of meat and just go out for a while. That's kind of what I'm building my shit set up for, because like bugging out, like how long are you really going to stay out? Like you're going to have to come back
Yeah.
in eventually.
Yeah, in which case, I mean, then that opens a whole nother. I mean, you can really do that in a variety of different things, especially if you're one person. Like, I've seen people that just take a truck, throw a camper shell on the back, insulate the fuck out of it, and like, they go off. Like, there's one guy, he does, I think he's Canadian, maybe. I don't know. A lot of Canadians do this for some reason. Um, but he has a truck with like a camper shell on the back, and I think it's like a Toyota Tacoma or something, and he goes out and he'll do like overnights in like freezing temperatures, but it's insulated and he has, a power inverter in there and he has a backup like extra battery and stuff, and I think he has a beefed up alternator, and he'll go out and he'll just sleep in there and have heat systems, and then he has like a little propane thing. He'll put the tailgate down, cook, and he has this swing out thing with a chopping board and stuff, and he'll cook and live it. And he does that for like weeks and weeks and weeks at a time, so like that's an option too. I mean,
Well, I
you know,
kind of figure between like the van, an awning on the van, maybe a trailer, and like a tent, you could set up like your own little village out there if you wanted to. Stay out there for a couple of fucking months, build survival shelters or whatever, depending on where you are. Like, I'm kind of figuring on buying 10 acres at some point to have some
yeah.
place just to go to. But this is kind of my idea.
The
And
other,
like
I mean,
from here, you could like use that tent setup or whatever to build a cabin or whatever. You bring tools with you.
yeah, um, yeah. I mean, that's definitely something you could do. Again, I
Because
just,
like that's the other thing with bugging out is like to where for what purpose. Like your thing with the boat makes sense because like if you have a boat, you could live on the boat and you have fresh water and you could catch fish and there's like you have a plan. Maybe not the best plan, but it's a plan. And like most bug out locations are like, well, this is this spot out in the woods that nobody knows about. We might be able to shoot a deer or something, but like that doesn't sound like a good plan to me either. So half of the discussion of bug out vehicles is like where you're going to go, I think, really.
Yeah, yeah.
And that shapes a lot of the
And,
conversation on why you do what vehicle you do.
and here's the thing too is what I would say is if you have a location that you're bugging out to, if you're planning on staying at that said location, right, at least for a major length of time, and you're expecting like your bug out vehicle to have to go through some shit, um, make sure you have some basic tools and stuff like that there to do repairs on the vehicle or
Yeah.
do upgrades if you have to. Like I know someone in here put something about, replacing fuel systems and stuff like that. Yes, technically you can do that. But I mean, even if it's something like, you know, again, it's going to depend on the vehicle, but like if it's like an older 80s vehicle, like a spare motor or something, like, I mean, you can get a spare block. And again, it depends on like how much shit you expect to go through. Um, but like but like if it's like an old like 350 or something, like you can get 350 for dirt cheap from a junkyard. I mean,
I
you know,
I kind of figure like I'm getting something cheap and I'm gonna run it around until like it dies, and then I'm gonna replace it with something better. And whenever I get something better, I'm probably gonna put some thought into having something a little bit more like old school, maybe that'll like
yeah.
survive EMPs and shit, even. But for now, I kind of see all that as being kind of moot. Like you need something, and if whatever you can get is cheap, then that's what you got.
Well, that's kind of why I said like when we started off with this, like most people's bug out vehicle is going to be what they have. So
Yeah.
what I would recommend to most people is buy if that's going to be your bug out vehicle until you can find something better. Buy yourself a Haynes manual for it. I mean, they're like at least they used to be $20. I don't know. They may have gone up a little bit now, but
I,
buy yourself a Haynes manual. Get yourself a set of tools. I mean, you don't have to go crazy, but like Harbor Freight, you can get basic tool sets. And granted, they're not necessarily the best tools always. I enjoy Harbor Freight because lifetime warranty. If something breaks, I just bring it back. But um, you
it
know,
depends on what you're
it-
getting. Like
yeah, it depends what you're. Yeah,
I wouldn't buy a
like there.
power drill at Harbor Freight, but I would buy a set of screwdrivers at Harbor
I
Freight.
mean, I'd buy a drill from. I wouldn't buy their jack stands necessarily, even though I have, and I just like to live dangerously. Um, but uh, get yourself some tools. I would say get yourself some jack stands. And you don't even have to do it at a parts store, right? Like you can go to a lot of times you hit up yard sales and stuff like that, and people are selling that shit for dirt cheap. Swamp meets, dirt, not as much as swap meets, but still like yard sales, flea market stuff. You can get some stuff for really cheap. That's where I got my first set of jack stands. Was I was went to a yard sale and like some guy was like, "I got $10. I got two sets of jack stands," and I was like, "Cool." Um, you can get a lot of tools there as well. Get yourself a basic set of tools. You don't have to go with like an engine hoist and stuff like that. If you want to, sure, go for it, but that's going a little bit extreme, at least off the bat. Um, get yourself some breaker bars, things of that nature. Stuff to do at least your basic repairs with. Don't have to go into your specialty tools unless it's a known issue with the vehicle, in which case I would invest in those specialty tools. But again,
So raw feeding has a good point. That's you need to have your vehicle set up to keep you alive in weather. And like heat, cold is easier to deal with, I think, than heat. Like a really hot car, there's really just not much you could do other than get out of the car. Like have a tarp in it maybe or something, awning off the side. But like have plans for this sort of shit in your bug out vehicle.
yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I think that goes back to our first chat that we did with bug out bags
Yeah.
and go bags and stuff like that. Like I always have extra water and blanket in my car, stuff like that, just for those
This is
situations.
this is why I'm spent so much money on a solar setup and a fridge. When you watch the overlanding people, it becomes very clear to you that like if you're gonna have one thing that's electrically powered, a refrigerator is probably what you would want. At least of the big things. Like once you have enough power to do the fridge, you have lights and fans and a bunch of other shit. You could charge whatever you want. So like of the big items, like air conditioner is like a nice to have. A refrigerator is like the difference between being in the 1900s and the 1800s.
Yeah. I mean, true. If you set your vehicle up right, it is a giant bug out bag. I mean,
Yeah.
but then you have to balance too with what your vehicle. Like for my vehicle, I have a little coupe. I still need to have room to carry shit with. So it's like, all right, I can
Well,
set up
even
only
in
so
your
much stuff.
thing though, you could get the fridge I got even or a smaller one and the solar battery and a fold up panel and fit all that shit in your thing and take it with you. Like if you had that in a tent, you could fit that in your car.
Oh yeah, well I already have a tent in my car. I
Yeah.
have a small little like one person tent that sits right on my bag. Um, so that's not an issue. I wouldn't even bother taking up space with a fridge, but that's me because
Well,
I'm
that
planning
this
on
is
living out
different
of my car.
shit too. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Like I'm planning on being able to live out
yeah.
of this if you ever had to. And that's my other thing with the bug out vehicle is like this is like a preparedness vehicle. Like it's a thing that you could live out of if you had to, no matter where you went. And I think that's kind of how I'm looking at my quote unquote bug out vehicle. It's not really a bug out vehicle. It's just like you need something for life that'll allow you to do X, Y, or Z. And because of the things going on in the world, I'm wanting to be able to go camping.
Yeah. Oh, I'm trying to think what else. I think that kind of covers all of it. And I can't really think of anything else wise unless people have questions.
I think setting up your vehicle like a giant bug out bag is pretty smart. I think that's pretty much why I don't have a bug out bag. Like I did a video on mine the other day and it's like a bunch of camping gear. There's no food or water or clothes in it because like I would have to go and like pack that shit into the bag. I don't keep it set up, but like I'd like to have like a storage unit somewhere that this van just sits in, or you could like pull up in your sports car and like hit your little door opener button and then get in your van and drive out and you have your bug out van like the A team or
Mm.
some shit. You'd have to have like an 8-track tape of the A team soundtrack or something like for the drive out of the fucking storage facility. Uh, Anything else we didn't talk about that we wanted to? Uh,
So I'm trying to see.
I'm gonna hit weapons again. I think the realities of everything being what it is, you're probably going to have a vehicle, and that dramatically changes what you can carry versus just on foot. And there's a lot of shit in the gun community that assumes like you're gonna be hiking 19 miles into the backcountry or some shit. And I think that's foolish. Like I kind of figure I'm going to be with my vehicle. If I'm not with my vehicle, I'm going to be shooting whoever is trying to get me away from my vehicle.
Yeah, I'm just again like I'm not throwing arms up on my. I it screams attention too much, and I don't want to
It
do that.
does. I just want to have a mount for a black powder cannon on my van just to say I do. Also, a door gunner would be pretty cool.
Yeah, it would be cool. I I mean, again, like it's cool, but it's not something that I'm probably ever going to actually need.
I really think having some Mad Max spikes would be cool too, but everyone else disagrees.
Yeah, no, because
What
those are
about
just cosmetic.
gyrocopters? Can we get gyrocopters?
So it's funny you mentioned those. I have a buddy that was looking into. He does like sailing and stuff, and he gets into weird ass hobbies. With like whenever he has extra money, he's like, "Oh, I want a new hobby." Um,
Yeah.
no, granted, he's been sailing since he was a kid, but like he just does random shit. So he was looking at like gyrocopters and those like parasailing things where you basically hook a big ass fan to your back.
I've
Um,
been looking at those too, man.
but that sport's very expensive,
It is.
extremely expensive,
I saw
and so
someone take one up to like 18,000 feet. And I was like, Jesus Christ, I don't know if I would do that.
yeah, it's ridiculous. So, um,
He's like, there's a passenger jet flying by me now. Like, yeah, that's one of those. You probably shouldn't be doing that, bro.
yeah, yeah. So it's. I mean, they're cool. Don't get me wrong, but it's an expensive thing to get into.
It would be cool to have a flying thing to bug out with, but I don't think any of the cheap ones that you could afford to buy haul enough shit to make it worth it. That makes
Not
any sense.
yeah, not really. I mean, it's
That's kind of like when we talked about rifles, we mentioned bullpups right at the end. That's this. We're mentioning gyrocopters right at the end.
yeah. I mean, like you could sit there and be like, oh, stole planes and stuff like that. Like,
A
yeah,
stall
they're
plane
really
would be fucking bitching. I'll give you that.
it
And
it
especially
would
if
be,
you
but
had one, if you had one that could haul at least 1,000 pounds of shit, that would be cool. But no stall plane hauls that. Like they
yeah,
haul
exactly.
you and maybe 50 pounds of gear. Maybe. Like my rifle and ammunition and like a bag of food would weigh as much as what a stall plane carry.
Yeah. So
Well, I
but
guess that's pretty much it for this Red Dawn podcast. So we're running out of shit to talk about and talking about stall planes and gyrocopters. So we'll see you next week, I guess. What should we talk about next week? Should we try to do the radio thing?
if you want to, we
I
can
don't
try
know if
that.
that's going to be this next week or the week after, but Hashnasi, who's Ham Radio Crash Course, is going to join us for a Red Dawn podcast to talk about radios. Hopefully, Duke will be alive by then. Uh, if not, like it will be nice to have a third person here. I have to get a replacement Duke for the summer. We'll think about that. If you'd like to be the replacement Duke, let us know. Uh, so
Yeah.
maybe next time radios. If we can't get Hashnasi for next time, we'll come up with something. Put your ideas in the chat and they'll be considered, I guess. I'll see you guys later.
Later.